Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode. And this week, the lovely people at Pergear have sent me a free gift. It's this, the Pergear 10mm Fisheye f8 lens. And I've been out and about shooting this little lens recently, and I've had a lot of fun. But just because this is a free gift doesn't mean I'm not going to give you the straight dope. I'm going to review this lens just as though I'd been out and bought it myself. Now, it's not easy to get wide-angle lenses for crop sensor cameras because of the crop factor that the smaller sensor creates. To get a wide for a crop sensor camera, you need to go very wide, and this lens certainly is. However, this is not a full frame lens. It won't cover the full frame sensor. You'll get lots of heavy vignetting and a circular effect as though you're looking down a pipe. So this is APS-C and micro four thirds only. Nominally 10mm on APS-C, it performs as a 15mm lens, so that's still very wide, and on micro four thirds it behaves as a 20mm lens, so that's still pretty wide. Perhaps the greatest thing about this lens is its price. It costs only £79, so it really is a budget solution to the wide angle problem for crop sensor cameras. Let's have a closer look at it. So perhaps the first and most obvious thing to say about this lens is to do with its size. It's so tiny. It really is very, very small. It's got the rear cap on at the moment. I'll take that off, and you can see that the whole thing, the whole lens, is actually no thicker hardly than the entire rear cap. So this is a very, very, very tiny lens indeed, and I don't think I've ever seen a lens that's smaller than this one. And I think in this case a lot of lenses get called pancakes, but in this case it's accurate. This is a very, very, very tiny little lens indeed, and in fact if I put the lens cap on, you can see that the lens cap itself is only just slightly smaller than the lens. So this is very, very tiny. I don't think I've ever seen a lens so small as this. Now apparently somewhere in there are 5 elements in, I think, 4 groups, so that means there's one cemented doublet somewhere. Where they are, I just can't imagine. They must be tiny, tiny elements, but apparently they are in there. Let's have a look what it looks like on a camera now. So here it is on the Sony A6000. Lovely little camera, the A6000, which I've been using recently, and I'm going to do a full review on it soon. You can see this lens is just so tiny on this camera. It's almost like not having a lens at all. It's just like having a body cap sitting on your camera. It has a focusing tab in the center here, so we've got the infinity setting there, and the closest focus distance, which is 30 centimeters at the other end. It's a very nice fluid movement. It's a very well made lens. It's all made of metal. There's a central mark there which you can leave it in for much of the time. That's sort of average middle distance. It's a very, very sharp lens. I got lots of sharp images out of it, and of course it gives massive depth of field. You're not going to get much blur, if any, from this lens. You will in fact get more blur out of your phone camera than you will from this lens. Phone cameras at least have a larger aperture. They go up to around f2 and beyond that these days. This is a tiny little lens, very, very wide lens with a fixed f8 aperture. So if you want background blur, you're just not going to get any. And the best thing to do if you want any blur out of this lens is to forget it. I have to admit, this is not my natural focal length. I don't usually gravitate towards wide-angle lenses, and in fact I've not really shot many wide-angle lenses. I did shoot the Voigtlander 15mm over the summer that was lent to me by a viewer, and I had a lot of fun using that. But I did, whenever I do come to wides, I use them so little that I have to really sort of refine the technique, and you do have to vary your technique slightly. I think really you need to think more about composition. You certainly can't get any blur out of this lens. Maybe you can out of some wides, but certainly not out of this one. This one is sharp all the way. So you're playing with line, you're playing with form, and you're playing around with the position of different elements in the shot. One interesting thing you can do is play with depth. You can bring an object quite near and have it filling, say, half the frame, and have the background in the background using the lines and the other forms in the shot. So that was the general sort of approach I took. So it's really more of an emphasis on composition, I think. It does have some inherent distortion. In fact, it has a lot of distortion. The closer you get to straight lines, the more likely they are to distort. Any straight line placed anywhere near the edge of the frame, any of the four edges of the frame, is going to bend and distort. It's going to bow in the middle. You can get a straight horizon from this camera, but the horizon has to be in the dead center of the shot. Otherwise, if it's at the bottom of the shot, it's going to curve this way. If it's nearer the top of the shot, it's going to curve this way. So you will get a lot of distortion out of this lens. And part of the fun of this lens is just learning how to use that distortion, playing around and using it as part of the forms, as part of the lines in the shot. They do say that you shouldn't use a wide lens like this for architectural shots, and in terms of accuracy, no, that's absolutely true, you shouldn't. But in terms of fun, my gosh, you can make some quite extraordinary shapes using this little lens if you do go and photograph buildings. And I found actually that was a real area of interest. As I got used to the lens, as I practiced the lens, I found that buildings actually were really interesting things to shoot. You both can and can't get close to objects at the minimum focus distance. If you set the lens to 30 centimeters, the minimum focus distance, and you shoot an object at that distance, it will be in focus, yes, but because this is such a wide lens, it will actually be a fairly small visual element in that lens, unless it's a massive object that you're photographing. So you kind of can and can't get close. You can shoot at the minimum focus distance all day long, but those elements that you're shooting will be quite small elements in the shot. The closer you go, the more distortion you get, so you have to learn to play around with that, and you can make some really wacky, fascinating, unusual, quirky looking images once you learn how to play around with that distortion. It's a really, really sharp lens, quite astonishingly sharp, not surprising with that fixed aperture of f8, but it really is a bitingly sharp lens, and contrast is really good as well. This is a very contrasty lens. If you shoot into the sun, the coatings must be pretty good because it doesn't very easily lose contrast. It will shoot into the sun, and it will make some nice stars from the sun as well, which is always interesting. And in fact, if you can use that in your shot, a sun star is a nice element to include in a shot. So it doesn't too readily wash out, it doesn't too readily lose contrast under strong light if you're shooting into strong light, but it does bleed a little bit. You do get a little bit of light bleed, so if you've got a very light area like the sky next to a very dark area, say a building, the light will bleed from the light into the dark area just a little. I think that is to do with the light being transmitted and refracted within the elements of the glass. Colour is absolutely magnificent. It's very solid, full, strong, resonant colours with lots of body, lots of depth. Rather a cool colour balance. It is on the cool side, this lens. This is not a warm lens. It gives you cool colours, but it really does pump up the saturation, which personally I like. I regard that as one of the necessary elements in a fun lens like this. This lens does vignette quite a lot. You get dark corners if you're shooting against a light background, and they're pretty obvious and evident. However, this is vignetting unlike any vignetting I've ever seen before. It's pretty heavy, not the heaviest I've seen, not like some vintage lenses for example, but it is pretty heavy. But the weird thing about it is it's purple. How that happens, I don't know. Vignetting I've seen from every other lens, any vignetting I've ever seen has been dark, a sort of a grey look in the corners, a darkening of the corners. This one makes the corners purple, violet, and it'll kind of spread out from the corners into the frame. Sometimes it spreads across the entire top of the frame, and I actually rather like it. It's a really nice effect. Never ever have I seen in my life purple vignetting. Whether that's something that's been built into the lens, it's a fun lens, maybe somebody's thought purple vignetting can only be more fun, and I'd be inclined to agree. Whether it's simply a fault that's crept in, who knows, I don't know, but I really like it. I think it's a really nice effect. So does this little lens have technical flaws? Well, yes, it does. But I don't think those flaws are going to be uppermost in your mind, because this lens is about fun. It doesn't matter that it's got massive distortion. It doesn't matter that it's got purple vignetting. It just doesn't matter. I'll forgive it all its faults, because this is a fun lens, and that's how it should be shot. This little lens modulates reality. It changes the way the world looks. It changes the familiar world of straight lines and predictable angles, and it just mashes them all up and messes them all up, and you end up with really surreal, off the wall, quirky, unusual kinds of images. And it really fills a gap in the market that's been there for quite some time. This whole gap of wide lenses for APS-C and micro four thirds bodies. This one fills the gap perfectly, and all the better, so much the better, for its really cheap price of £79. Absolutely fantastic value, a lovely little lens, a great way to practice wide angle technique if you've not used a wide angle lens before, and a great way to make some really fun, unusual and quirky looking images with your crop sensor camera. I've enjoyed using this lens, and I've made some interesting images with it. Coming up on the channel soon, we've got a review of this little beauty, the Sony A6000. We've got a review of the Jobo Daylight Developing Tank. We've got a review of this fantastic little camera, the Nikon L35AF, known as the Bikaichi, I believe. So we've got some interesting things coming up, to which I hope you will tune in. But for now, that's it from me. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to support it and you'd like to help it grow and develop, then you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. As ever, thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.